January 9, 2024, News Report 1. U.S. President Biden delivered a speech on January 8 at the African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, South Carolina, aiming to garner support from African American voters. The church, belonging to the African Methodist Episcopal denomination, had experienced a shocking racially motivated massacre in 2015. Back then, a white supremacist killed 9 African American worshippers, eventually receiving the death penalty in 2017. During the speech, Biden criticized Republicans for whitewashing the history of white enslavement of black people in the United States. He stated that the poison of white supremacy has no place in America. According to a December poll by the Associated Press and the NRC Public Affairs Research Center, only 50% of African American adults support Biden's re-election, a decrease from 86% in July 2021. Biden is actively working to connect with African American voters, especially considering their traditional support for the Democratic Party, which has seen a decline in recent polls. News Report 2. On January 8, a federal court in California sentenced U.S. Navy Petty Officer Zhao Wenheng to 27 months in prison and fined him $5,500 for leaking classified information about the U.S. Navy to China. Zhao served at a naval base in Ventura County, California, from August 2021 to May 2023. During this time, he collected information on U.S. Navy operations in the Indo-Pacific region and radar communications of U.S. forces in Japan, providing it to Chinese intelligence in exchange for $15,000. Prosecutors revealed that Zhao disclosed crucial information about the U.S. Navy's operational training exercises to Chinese intelligence. The U.S. Department of Justice criticized Zhao for betraying his oath to defend the United States and jeopardizing the safety of other U.S. military personnel. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, will continue its investigation into Chinese espionage activities, and the U.S. Department of Justice will continue its efforts to combat actions that threaten national security. News Report 3. U.S. Secretary of State Blinken held talks with Israeli Foreign Minister Katz on January 9 in Israel. Blinken stated that if Israel could find a way to establish a Palestinian state, nearby Arab countries would be willing to normalize their relations with Israel, promoting regional integration. He emphasized the challenging moment and the need to ensure that Hamas does not launch cross-border attacks again. In the past 2 days, Blinken visited Arab countries, including Jordan, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia, attempting to formulate a long-term solution to the decades-long conflict between Israel and Palestine. As part of efforts to address the current conflict, Blinken's Middle East tour has achieved some success. The U.S. continues to support Israel in countering Hamas and Hezbollah in Lebanon, and Arab countries are generally cooperating. On January 9, Blinken also met with Israeli President Herzog to discuss efforts to release hostages. He is currently in talks with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and will later meet with the Israeli Minister of Defense. Additionally, the Israeli military announced a temporary ceasefire in the central Gaza Strip on January 9, allowing for a 4-hour pause in military strikes to facilitate the passage of humanitarian aid. Similar ceasefire measures had been implemented in northern Gaza earlier. News Report 4. French President Macron appointed Education Minister Gabriel Attal as the new Prime Minister on January 9. Attal, at the age of 34, previously served as the government spokesperson in 2017 and became the Education Minister in July of the previous year. He is the youngest education minister in French history and now becomes the youngest prime minister. Attal is considered a figure with Macronist principles and is the first openly gay member of the cabinet. The previous prime minister, Berlot, resigned on January 8, citing widespread criticism of the recently passed immigration bill in France. In the French political system, the president is responsible for setting the country's major policies, while the prime minister oversees the day-to-day operations of the government. As Macron's party lacks an absolute majority in parliament, each review of new legislation faces intense debates. Macron hopes that changing the prime minister will ease the challenges of his second term. News Report 5. Toronto's Torstar reported that starting from January 1 this year, the financial proof required for Canadian student visa applications has increased from $10,000 Canadian dollars to $20,000 Canadian dollars. For the past decade, the financial proof for Canadian study visas has been consistently set at $10,000 Canadian dollars. The Canadian Immigration Agency's official website states that $10,000 Canadian dollars is no longer sufficient to cover the rising cost of living, justifying the need for an increase in financial proof. It is reported that from January 1, 2022, to April 30, 2023, a total of 860,000 people applied for Canadian student visas, but only 470,000 were approved. This means that 45.7% of student visa applications were rejected. Students arriving in Canada found insufficient funds, struggled to find housing, and even needed to access food banks. Immigration officials criticized universities for treating international students as cash cows, leading to widespread fraud and misuse. The new financial proof standards aim to ensure that international students have sufficient funds to cover basic living costs in Canada. News Report 6. The president of the Chinese University of Hong Kong, Rocky Tuan, announced his resignation on January 9, planning to step down in January of the next year. Rocky Tuan, an internationally renowned biomedical expert, took over as the president of CUHK in 2018, with an original term of 6 years. In 2021, he was granted a 3-year extension, intending to serve until 2027. However, since the outbreak of the anti-extradition protests, CUHK has been in a state of social turmoil. On November 11, 2019, demonstrations erupted at CUHK, and riot police prepared to enter the campus for suppression. Rocky Tuan personally intervened to prevent the police from entering and demanded the release of arrested students. However, tear gas was fired by the police in front of him, bringing chaos to the campus. Subsequently, some students issued an open letter, urging outsiders to leave CUHK immediately and calling on remaining members to evacuate promptly. In November of last year, the Hong Kong Legislative Council restructured the CUHK Council, introducing a large number of external directors, effectively placing the university under government control. The council announced the removal of Vice-Chancellor Joseph Sung in December, and Rocky Tuan expressed gratitude to him on the university's website before making fewer public appearances. This series of events indicates the departure of an internationally renowned university president from CUHK. News Report 7. The Predictive Science Research Center of the Chinese Academy of Sciences released a report on January 9, forecasting China's GDP growth for the year to be 5.3%. The report indicates that the economic trend for the year will exhibit a pattern of starting low and then rising, with growth rates projected at 5% for the first quarter, 5.3% for the second quarter, 5.5% for the third quarter, and 5.4% for the fourth quarter. In contrast to the starting low, reaching a middle high, and stabilizing, described by former Deputy Director of the National Development and Reform Commission Han Wenxiu, the CAS forecast suggests a gradual increase in economic growth for the year. The CAS report emphasizes stable internal growth in the Chinese economy, an acceleration in investment growth, a real estate market improvement driven by policy measures, and consumption contributing to a 3.7 percentage point increase in GDP growth, while investment will drive a 1.9 percentage point increase. However, the report also points out that the unclear export situation may have a negative impact of 0.3 percentage points on GDP growth. It is noteworthy that external predictions for China's economy this year are generally lower than the levels seen last year. Goldman Sachs predicts a 4.8% economic growth rate in 2024, France's new business estimates 4.5%, and the International Monetary Fund, IMF, forecasts 4.6%. The consensus is that this year's growth rate may be lower than the previous year. Additionally, Regarding the exchange rate of the Chinese yuan, on January 9, the onshore yuan closed at 7.1590, appreciating by 9 basis points, while the offshore yuan rose to 7.1601 during the Asian session. Traders generally believe that one of the reasons for the yuan's appreciation is the signal from the Federal Reserve indicating a possible end to the U.S. interest rate hiking cycle. Fed Governor Bowman stated that the U.S. might conduct its first interest rate cut in the third quarter of this year, with expectations of 2 interest rate cuts throughout the year. News Report 8. According to a report from Nikkei Chinese Net on January 9, the Nikkei average index in Tokyo closed at 33,763 points, rising by 385 points, reaching a new high since March 1990. It is noteworthy that after reaching its historical high of 38,915 points at the end of 1989, the Nikkei average experienced the collapse of the bubble economy, leading to economic downturns during the Heisei era. Subsequently, influenced by the Lehman Brothers crisis, the index hit its lowest point of 7,054 points in March 2009. However, since the implementation of Abenomics in Japan in 2013, the stock market has gradually recovered. In the past decade, the Nikkei average index has doubled, outperforming the Dow Jones Industrial Average. On January 8, U.S. stocks rose driven by technology stocks, and Japanese investors directed funds to Japanese technology stocks on the 9th, especially high-valuation chip concept stocks such as Tokyo Electron and Advantest, boosting the Nikkei average index. News Report 9. According to a report by Caixin on January 9, the total losses in China's civil aviation industry last year reached 29 billion. Over the past 3 years, the Chinese civil aviation industry has faced increasing losses due to the impact of the pandemic. Specifically, losses were 97.4 billion in 2020, 84.2 billion in 2021, and 216 billion in 2022, totaling 400 billion over 3 years. With the easing of domestic pandemic control in 2023, the domestic aviation market gradually recovered, but the recovery of international routes has been relatively slow. Statistics from the Civil Aviation Administration show that the capacity of domestic routes exceeded pre-pandemic levels last year, growing 1.5 times, while international flights only recovered to 38% of the 2019 level. Due to the impact of the pandemic, domestic aircraft originally allocated for international routes were redirected to the domestic market, leading to a decline in domestic airfare. Additionally, due to the decrease in aircraft utilization and load factors, China's civil aviation continues to incur losses despite making money in other countries' aviation industries. News Report 10. According to a report from Bloomberg, United Airlines and Alaska Airlines recently discovered a problem of loose components on their Boeing 737 MAX 9 aircraft. Specifically, on January 5, a Boeing 737 MAX 9 aircraft of Alaska Airlines experienced an emergency when the cabin door suddenly burst open and detached during flight over Portland, Oregon, resulting in a rupture, loss of control, and depressurization. Fortunately, no casualties occurred in the incident. Following the incident, the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, ordered the grounding of all 171 Boeing 737 MAX 9 aircraft in the United States. The National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, requested airlines to conduct safety inspections, focusing particularly on whether the 4 bolts of the emergency cabin door were properly tightened. United Airlines stated that there were installation issues with the cabin doors of the 737 MAX 9, requiring further tightening of the bolts, which is currently being addressed. Officials from the NTSB stated that they would expand the scope of the investigation to thoroughly study the reasons for the cabin door detachment. News Report 11. According to a report from Ishikawa Prefecture, Japan on January 9, a magnitude 7.6 earthquake occurred on January 1, resulting in 202 deaths and 102 people missing. After this disaster, Taiwan opened a government donation account on January 5. As of January 8, the total amount donated by the Taiwanese public to the disaster-stricken area in Japan exceeded 700 million yen. Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen expressed in Japanese on Twitter that when Japan is in difficulty, Taiwan is also in difficulty. The Taiwanese government has donated 60 million yen. The donation campaign will continue until January 19, with the total amount expected to increase further. News Report 12. The South Korean National Assembly passed a special law on January 9 with 208 votes in favor and 2 abstentions, banning the consumption of dog meat. The law prohibits the raising of dogs for food, explicitly forbidding the buying and selling of dog meat. Offenders can be sentenced to a maximum of 3 years in prison and face a fine of 30 million won, approximately $23,000. Considering the livelihood issues of industry practitioners, the law stipulates a 3-year buffer period. The government plans to completely ban the consumption of dog meat by 2027. South Korea has had a long-standing culture of eating dog meat, but this phenomenon has significantly decreased in recent years. The government has attempted to eradicate this culture multiple times, but public sentiment has exerted significant influence. According to data as of November last year, there are still 1,150 dog farms, 34 slaughterhouses, and over 1,600 dog meat restaurants in South Korea. News Report 13. Bloomberg reports that Chen Tianxiao, founder of Shanda Group, owns 108,000 acres of forest land in Oregon, totaling 80,000 hectares. He ranks 82nd on the list of U.S. landowners and is the second largest foreign landowner in the United States. In comparison, the Irving family from Canada owns over 1.2 million acres of forest land in Maine, ranking 6th on the U.S. landowner list and being the largest foreign landowner in the United States. As of 2021, foreign ownership of land in the United States has reached 40 million acres. In contrast, Chinese companies and individuals own only 0.03% of all agricultural land in the United States. Chen Tianxiao founded Shanda Entertainment Network Company in 1999, rapidly rising in the online gaming industry and becoming one of China's largest internet companies. In 2004, he listed the company on Nasdaq. In 2012, Chen Tianxiao privatized the company and relocated its headquarters from China to Singapore.